Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you lead anything, a team, a business, a family, or even just your own life, you know the feeling. It's this climate of just constant turbulence, relentless expectation, and for a lot of people, massive burnout. We're always told we need to grip the reins tighter, control the narrative, hustle harder.
And that's the problem, right? That conventional approach, the one that relies just on your own personal strength and ambition, it's failing. It's leaving leaders completely exhausted, anxious, and just running on empty. Our source material for today, which is drawn from excerpts of Led Under God, basically tears that whole model down.
It really does, and it poses this core, really provocative question that just flips the entire script.
Yeah.
What if the greatest authority you will ever wield isn't in how tightly you grip those reins, but in how fully you release them? That idea that surrender is actually strategic, it feels so counterintuitive, maybe even, heretical in our achievement culture.
It is, precisely. And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack this really unconventional philosophy that's rooted in divine partnership. We need to get past the motivational talk and really understand the mechanics of it. Why does this material insist that surrender is the key to enduring influence, to strategic clarity, and to leaving a lasting legacy?
Yeah.
It's basically a roadmap for shifting from that exhausting self-reliance to a more sustainable God-reliance, a profound shortcut to leadership that works.
Okay, let's jump right into that core paradox. The authors have this really powerful critique of what they call conventional leadership. So why isn't it enough anymore? Why is control, micromanagement, that sheer force of will, why is that failing us in these modern volatile times?
Well, the critique is that when you rely only on what you can see, on your own human ingenuity, you're imposing some really severe limitations on yourself. Conventional leadership, the kind driven by ego and personal ambition, it always narrows your vision. It makes your decisions reactive. You can only carry what your own personal bandwidth allows.
And the result of that is what? Diminished impact.
Diminished impact, strained relationships, and leaders who are operating from a place of anxiety because they feel like they have to shoulder every single burden alone. The authors argue that to lead through all this complexity, what you really need is a strength that transcends the human. You need leadership anchored in a divine partnership.
So when we hear that word surrender, I think our immediate secular thought is weakness, right? Passivity, giving up. How does the source redefine surrender as a strategic strength?
Yeah, that's the counterintuitive truth. This kind of surrender is not weakness, and it is absolutely not passive. It is, in fact, maybe the most disciplined and deliberate act a leader can take. The material defines it as a strategic alignment of your will with a higher divine authority. It's that moment where personal ambition kind of bows to divine wisdom.
Clarity over control. I really like that framing.
Exactly. When you define influence as a grasp, you limit it to your own reach. But when you see it as a flow, as a partnership, it suddenly becomes limitless. The source shows again and again that the higher and wider your influence needs to go, the deeper your strategic surrender has to be to maintain integrity and that momentum.
And the authors, they ground this with a really powerful personal anecdote. They talk about times when they tried to carry everything alone, every decision, every burden.
Right, running on pure adrenaline.
Yeah.
And that control, it just led to constant firefighting, a reactive decision-making cycle. The transformation really started when they truly surrendered that control. And they describe it as painful, humbling, but also profoundly liberating. That shift matured their leadership, and crucially, it generated a momentum, a breakthrough in effectiveness that they said they could never have engineered on their own.
That momentum piece is the real so what for any leader listening. So the source gives 8 principles or guideposts for this journey. Let's zoom in on the first 2, the real foundational ones, starting with this. Identity precedes influence.
This is the bedrock. Leadership under God doesn't begin with a great mission statement or some sophisticated business plan. It starts with knowing exactly who you are in Him. Identity, as the material puts it, is the soil from which all enduring influence has to grow.
So that means understanding your inherent value outside of your performance metrics, right? Because if you don't have that clarity, you're just so vulnerable to pride when things go well and total burnout when they don't.
Absolutely. And the theological insight here is critical. It all rests on Imago Dei, the idea that we're created to reflect God's character in our leadership. If a leader forgets that, the material warns they risk becoming a tyrant or a taskmaster, operating from self-interest instead of being a shepherd.
And to make that more concrete, they point to David, the shepherd king.
Yes. David's power didn't come from his military might. It came from an identity that was grounded in God's promises to him. He wasn't trained in a palace. He was shaped out in the quiet fields, learning about reliance and protection. His influence became so lasting because it was something he grew into from a place of secure identity, not something he seized through ambition. And that secure identity, knowing he was appointed, not just aspiring, is what equipped him for all the political chaos he faced later on.
Okay, so identity anchors you, and then the next principle, humility, is what actually releases the power. This is the second big paradox. Humility empowers.
It really is. Humility is the active invitation for divine strength. It's often misunderstood as, shrinking yourself. But in this context, it is the radical act of self-awareness you need to invite an external, limitless power. The source even uses the theological concept of kenosis, the self-emptying of Christ, as the model for this kind of humility.
Okay, let's make that less abstract. How does kenosis or self-emptying apply to a modern CEO or a project manager? This just sounds like weakness.
On the contrary, in modern leadership, self-emptying just means stepping aside from the need to take all the credit. It means admitting when you don't have the expertise and empowering your people to rise. It means taking radical responsibility when things fail and then radically sharing the credit when things succeed. It's the leader saying, look, I recognize my own limits and I am intentionally inviting strength beyond my own.
And we see that mechanism of humility fueling courage in the story of Nehemiah rebuilding Jerusalem. I mean, he faced threats, huge opposition, resource scarcity.
Nehemiah is a perfect blueprint for what happens when humility is applied in a crisis. When he was faced with opposition, the authors point out that he didn't immediately just double down on security or brute force.
No, he leaned into prayer.
He leaned into prayer and dependence. His humility before God is what fueled his courage before Sanballat and Tobiah. He was fearless because his reliance wasn't on his own ability to secure the wall, but on God's provision. That radical reliance was his authority.
And for anyone listening, this isn't just some abstract idea. The source suggests concrete things you can do. Daily prayer, inviting hard feedback, accountability. Humility is an actionable discipline, not just a feeling.
It is, and that flows right into the next operational discipline required for this kind of leadership: trust.
Trust is active reliance. I think that distinction is so important. It's not just passively waiting for things to happen. It's an active choice that should inform every single strategic decision you make.
Yes, and it shifts your whole operational risk model. The perfect historical case study for this is George Mueller. He ran these huge orphanages in 19th century England, and he refused to ask for public funding. This wasn't a passive experiment. This was him operationalizing faithfulness. He actively relied on God's provision day by day for hundreds of kids without a stable income.
Okay, but hold on. In today's rapid-fire, highly accountable environment, whether you're at a startup or a big department, pausing to discern seems like a huge liability, competitively and financially. Does the source address that? The perceived cost of this active trust?
It addresses it head on. It suggests that while the short-term human cost of waiting might seem high, the long-term cost of acting without that alignment is always higher. It leads to reactive decisions, wasted effort, maybe even moral compromise. Mueller's example shows that his active reliance resulted in a legacy of consistency and integrity that no amount of fundraising could have ever bought. The source challenges us to just identify one major decision this week, one where we'd normally just lean on our own expertise, and to pause and to actively seek guidance instead.
Right.
That changes the rhythm completely.
And that active trust then leads us to a really critical management principle: obedience over strategy.
Right. Obedience in this philosophy is what transforms authority from just a concept into a tangible reality. It models integrity for your whole team, and it generates that true lasting momentum we were talking about earlier. It's about prioritizing God's instruction, even when your human strategy is screaming for a quicker, easier way.
You see that so starkly when Joshua steps into Moses' shoes. I mean, Moses was gone. The task of leading millions of people into a new land was just impossible by human metrics.
Absolutely. And Joshua's success wasn't rooted in his own charisma or military prowess. Not at all. It was rooted entirely in faithfully following God's commands, even when those commands, like marching around a wall, seemed militarily absurd. Leadership just gains weight and influence when its decisions are rooted in that kind of obedience, not just in a clever or complicated strategy. It provides a moral foundation.
But leadership has to involve strategy,
Right?
and resource allocation and planning. So how do you balance this radical obedience with the need for surrender and trust? Especially when, as the material says, God's timing often interrupts our human schedules.
This is the critical tension point, and the source spends a lot of time on it. The conclusion is that waiting is not procrastination. It's defined as strategic obedience to God's timing. The surrendered leader learns to discern when to act and when to wait, knowing that acting too early based on fear or impatience can undermine the whole vision and burn out your resources.
So strategy and surrender have to be inseparable partners. Nehemiah is the perfect synthesis again. He didn't just pray. He planned meticulously. He organized labor shifts. He stationed armed guards, delegated. But every single one of those steps was preceded by prayer and by reliance on God's provision.
Exactly. Strategy done well is not a replacement for surrender. It flows from surrender. It ensures that all your human effort is aimed at the right target at the right time. It's strategy that's infused with a divine perspective, which makes it far more effective and resilient.
So when a leader can maintain this rhythm, identity, humility, trust, obedience, and timing, the source says we get to the final phase, the revealed vision. Clarity doesn't come from a multi-day brainstorming session by itself. It comes from that radical alignment with a divine purpose.
Vision is revealed, not invented. If your leadership is rooted in God's character and it's obedient to his timing, the foresight you need is granted. We see this with Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dreams. His obedience and discernment allowed God's wisdom to translate a cryptic vision into an actionable national policy. He prepared an entire empire for a 7-year crisis they could have never seen coming. Surrender grants foresight that marketing teams just can't generate.
And the ultimate payoff of all this, the legacy, is influence as an overflow. True influence, the source claims, isn't control or coercion. It's the natural result of surrendered, faithful leadership.
Yes. When a leader is a conduit for divine authority, influence just spreads naturally, beyond their immediate oversight across the whole organization. This is what leads to true legacy. The material points to Paul's mentorship of Timothy. It didn't focus on political skill, but on character and faithfulness. The ultimate measure of this leadership is the lasting imprint left on teams and successors' character transfer over skill transfer.
And the source really hammers home that this whole framework is a rhythm. It's a daily posture, not a one-time event. They talk about that daily renewal, daily surrender, accountability, and having a core stewardship mindset. We don't own our influence, we steward it.
And that daily posture is exactly what cultivates resilience. The transformation from self-reliance to God-reliance is what equips leaders to stay perfectly steady under immense, sustained pressure. Think of Daniel in Babylon. His surrendered leadership, right in the middle of all that political chaos, influenced multiple kings and governments for decades. The resulting leadership is just resilient, influential, and strategic beyond any human calculation because it's anchored in something unchanging.
This journey of surrendered leadership, it's definitely challenging. It asks us to willingly give up the one thing our culture prizes most, control. But the source promises that by daily choosing identity, humility, trust, obedience, and service, we step into this limitless possibility, an influence that just cannot be engineered by human effort alone. It's a fundamental shift in how we see our roles, from being a solitary controller to a powerful partner.
It is. The authors fundamentally challenge the modern leadership paradigm. They argue that surrender isn't just spiritually desirable, it's strategically essential. It fosters trust, it strengthens culture, it cultivates a unity that dominance and control completely sabotage. It's the antidote to burnout and turbulence.
So, as you reflect on all this material from our deep dive today, here's the challenge the authors really leave us with. The source suggests that true authority is found in the courage to let go of control right in the face of risk. So what's one area of your leadership or your life, maybe it's a project, a challenging relationship, a financial decision, where you are currently clinging so tightly to control out of fear? And how might integrating a pause and discern framework, one that's built on active trust and alignment, fundamentally reshape that challenge and release the momentum you've been looking for?
That daily choice to yield control, that intentional posture, that's where the real enduring transformation of your influence begins.
A powerful, and I think profoundly essential, roadmap for navigating a chaotic world. Thank you for guiding us through this demanding and rewarding material. That's all the time we have for this deep dive.